Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very pleased to have this opportunity to speak on this bill because there are so many parts of this legislation that directly relate to my electorate in northwest Tasmania. And the member for Bendigo pointed out on labour market testing, and I will give a little bit later in my speech an example about how this coalition government and the Tasmanian Liberal government have failed not only local workers but local businesses in that area. So it's a little bit of a bittersweet irony that this government proclaims to be supporting Australian workers and their skills when all actions to date really suggest that it's complete opposite. Labor does have genuine concerns that this legislation will not go far enough and legislate strict labour market testing across not just a number of occupations but all occupations and all skilled visas. Ordinarily, legislation that seeks to protect the jobs of Australians from overseas labour would be something that this side of the House would, of course, endorse. But when it comes to matching the rhetoric with reality, this government cannot be trusted, and the member for Bendigo in her own electorate gave examples of how that occurs. For each of these policy failures, Labor has a solution that this government seems incapable of finding or is simply blinded by ideology to implement. As I've said, this government has form when it comes to labour market testing. When Labor was last in office, we strengthened visa laws so employers were required to look locally first. Now the Prime Minister and the now Minister for Immigration, or the now Prime Minister and the now Minister for Immigration and the now Treasurer all voted against Labor's sensible changes. They voted against making market testing and more controls in opposition, and they've taken almost 5 years in government to do something about it. But even now, what the government is proposing comes nowhere near Labor's policy to support local workers. Labor's policy genuinely puts local workers first. Our Labor leader and the member for Maribyrnong has previously introduced a private member's bill to this place on these issues. That legislation is about supporting the Australian wages system, upholding our standards and creating Australian jobs. It sets more rigorous evidence requirements for labour market testing for firms seeking to use 457 visas. A mandatory requirement for jobs is to be advertised for a minimum of 4 weeks, a requirement for labour market testing to occur no more than 4 months before the nomination of a visa worker position, a ban on job ads that target only overseas workers or specified visa class workers to the detriment of locals, and a crackdown on job ads that set unrealistic requirements for vacant positions as specifically designed to exclude locals. Under Labor's plan, if employers genuinely need a 457 visa holder for their business, they should have to provide evidence and information to prove it. Labor simply asks employers to show the need for the nominated occupations and to prove none of these positions can be filled by Australians. And this brings me to the example in my electorate where a couple of years ago the state Liberal government decided to use some money that was in cash reserves to replace the Spirits of Tasmania with new vessels to refurbish them. And it was a $20–30 million project. They contracted a UK-based company to undertake the work, and that company bought in 44% of the labour used on that project from overseas. Now, I remember getting a phone call from a local business who, through the complaints in the media that local businesses and workers were getting excluded from this work, said to me that the government has asked the contractor to give local businesses some little drip feeds of work, a little bit here, a little bit there to keep them quiet. And this man who had his own business said to me, there are foreign electricians running cables on the vessel that any electrician can do. It was absolutely disgusting, but he could not speak out about it, because if he did, the government would exclude him from any further work. So this not only impacts on the workers, but the businesses in my community, and I'm absolutely outraged that the federal Liberal government are doing nothing. The state Liberal government are complicit in bringing in overseas workers on a publicly funded project. On this side of the House, we know temporary work visas are not the long-term answer to the national skills shortage. We need a national training agenda. We need to invest in TAFE, training, skills and apprenticeships. And we should not be discouraging people from learning a trade or getting a qualification by sending the message that employers can just bring in someone else willing to do the job for less. The policy failures of this government when it comes to skills and training have hit hard in Tasmania. Under the Liberals, 1,900 apprentices have disappeared from Tasmanian industry. The biggest loss has taken place in my electorate of Braddon, where there are now 704 less apprentices than when the Abbott-Turnbull government was first elected. The trend continues under the Hodgman state government, and the skills sector in TAFE has lurched from one crisis to another. Overall, the amount of federal government support for apprentices, TAFE and VET has been cut by $3 billion under the Liberals. The Abbott-Turnbull government has also abolished the Industry Skills Fund and has dismantled the cooperative approach to skills involving unions, employers and government. When it comes to growing the skills base of Tasmanians, this is simply not good enough. I am pleased that the Tasmanian Labor leader Rebecca White has formulated a real plan to deal with the issues at a state level. Tasmanian Labor will establish industry advisory councils to create what is missing, a strong link between industry and education providers. And I can tell you from every meeting I have with industry in my electorate, there's no connection between them and education and training. I know from the work I have been doing as a Secretary of Labor's Australian Jobs Task Force that there is real disconnection between schools, training providers and industries, not just in my state, but across the country. The first task of Tasmanian Labor's industry advisory councils will be to conduct industry audits to gain an understanding of what the skills needs are in those various sectors, a very sensible first approach. State Labor will also back business with an apprentice bonus scheme that State Liberal leader Will Hodgman belatedly copied, of course. Good thing when your opponent copies good policy. After sitting on his hands, though, for 4 years. At a federal level, Labor's plan for jobs and skills development will see increased investment in TAFE and increased quality traineeships and apprenticeships. Federal Labor will restore the $637 million cut by the Turnbull government from VET funding in the 2017 budget. Federal Labor will make TAFE the centrepiece of our training system by guaranteeing at least 2/3 of all government VET funding goes to TAFE and by investing $100 million in revitalising campuses across the country. And Federal Labor will ensure that 1 in 10 jobs on all Commonwealth priority projects are apprentices. And Labor will expand pre-apprenticeship programs for young job seekers and invests in advanced adult apprenticeships for workers in transition. This side is serious about lifting our skills base and is serious about giving our young people across the country the ability to gain a trade. If there was one area in my electorate and Tasmania that highlights the government's policy failures when it comes to skilled labour, it's of course in the agricultural sector and particularly the horticultural sector. Just last week, along with the member for Bendigo, I met with industry players and heard that the Tasmanian horticultural industry is facing a severe labour shortage. This means that the crop will fall to the ground. I want to put on record my thanks to Mike Badcock from Enchanted Isle Farms for his help in bringing these people together. The forum heard that while the industry has just managed with the summer harvest, a much larger workforce is required for the late summer and autumn harvests as apples and pears come online. The forum highlighted a number of issues, including the backpacker tax, funnily enough, I think the writing was on the wall on that one, and changes to the 88-day second visa requirements. The forum was also told that exploitation by unscrupulous labour hire companies, strip picking versus select picking, and inconsistent piece rates are just some of the contributing factors. There is no consistency among the way in which farmers secure their labour. Some use labour hire, others Gumtree and others word of mouth, and many just pop up on the doorstep. Without a consistent method of securing labour, farmers are continually struggling to meet their labour needs. It was pointed out a lack of support from regional job service providers, and we hear this everywhere, and the member for Bendigo mentioned it as well, was another issue with examples of providers not being connected to local farmers. These farmers should be the clients of these agencies, and they are not, because it's the job seeker who comes with the money that they can just tick the box, send them on their way. Some don't even go to the farms and talk to the farmer about what he or she needs. They are just not interested in securing a person capable of doing these jobs. Another well-made point is that there is a need for the Department of Employment to gather the empirical data on why young people do not last working in the horticultural sector. They come for a day, they leave, and no one knows why. What are the barriers put in place of this person from not staying on? That's the information we need to know to help support these industries and young people in our communities. The overwhelming consensus from the forum is that the agricultural labour supply issues is a mess created by a series of policy failures. The industry is calling on all levels of government to come together and work collectively to find a solution. Labor is prepared to do that, and one outcome from the forum is that the Tasmanian horticultural industry will supply case studies and evidence to support future policy development, and I thank them for that. Part of this policy solution may include what I consider to be a very valuable suggestion from the forum, that we trial community hubs where potential worker and industry needs can be matched up. It's pretty simple. I'm sure with some work and the way it can work, it will work. These hubs will potentially remove the middlemen and make it much easier for industry to secure a workforce, whether that is local or backpackers. We understand there is always a need for backpackers. The Tasmanian industry generally want to engage with all levels of government, but to date, all they have received from this government is nothing short of lip service and, of course, an industry-destroying backpacker tax fiasco. After the forum, we also met with a local orchardist who told his story in trying to secure labour and what visitors tend to do. I have previously mentioned a disconnect between education and industry as being a contributing factor. A number of speakers at the forum were at pains to point out there was no encouragement at school for young people to pursue a career in the primary industry sector. Only today have I received a real-life example of this situation. I received a copy of a letter written by a young person from my electorate to Costa Group, who have a number of berry farms across my electorate. This young person has been fortunate to receive a Northwest Scholarship in Agricultural Science. And I want to read into Hansard the last sentence of his letter, and I quote, this is to Costa. "Your generosity has inspired me further to help others and to give back to the community. I also wish to advocate for change in Tasmanian secondary education. During my secondary education, I found you were not educated about agriculture in any of the core subjects and did not have the opportunity to study agriculture as an elective." This young person's letter sums up just how much work is needed to address the labour and skill shortages in our primary industry sector. This legislation before the House is just one small piece in the jigsaw, but a piece that can and should be better. What is needed is a government that has a genuine plan for education and training, a government that has a genuine plan to ensure employers look local first before employing overseas labour, and a government that will genuinely work with industry, unions and key stakeholders to develop the policy solutions that are needed to create decent and secure jobs for Australian workers. And it's sad to say, I do not think that it is this current government that can deliver that. Thank you.